Hey everyone. I hope all of you are doing great, but if you're not okay, and the chances of which are pretty high if you're not a little kid, just remember, sometimes it's okay to not be okay. I mean, it's life and it gets hard, but what appears permanent can actually be temporary. Anyway, so at this point I've made 11 parts on this topic, and each part is over an hour, so finding newer and unseen photos is getting harder and harder. I mean, it's probable you're going to see a photo or two which you've already seen before. And now, without further ado, let's begin with our first photo. In January 1991, Gernot Reinstadler, a 21-year-old Austrian ski racer, was competing in the qualification rounds for the prestigious Lauberhorn downhill race in Wengen, Switzerland. On January 18th, Gernot launched himself down the icy track, pushing his limits on one of the sport's most challenging courses. As he approached a section known as the Ziel S, a notoriously tricky finish, he lost control at high speed. Careening into the safety net, Gernot's body struck the edge with devastating force. The impact was catastrophic. His pelvis was split in half, and the severe injuries ruptured major blood vessels. Despite immediate medical intervention, including a rushed helicopter evacuation and hours of surgery, the blood loss was too great. Gernot succumbed to his injuries later that evening. The entire video of his crash and last moments is available on YouTube if you want to look. Although just know there's a reason why I'm not showing it here. Also, this entry is here because of ASMR Arboretum's suggestion, so I know you're probably watching. Thank you for the suggestion, and take care. John Jones, a 26-year-old medical student, came from a family of avid spelunkers, a group with a passion for exploring underground caves. During the Thanksgiving holiday, John was back in Utah with his family. Eager to reconnect, they decided to engage in an activity they loved, spelunking. This time, the destination was Nutty Putty Cave, a well-known but treacherous cave system in the area. For John and his family, this was their first visit to this particular cave. On the evening of November 24th, 2009, around 8 p.m., John, his younger brother Josh, 23 years old, and 9 other friends and family members entered the cave. Together, they explored a section known as the Big Slide, which was relatively easy to navigate. However, feeling confident in his abilities despite years away from spelunking, John decided to take on a more challenging part of the cave called the Birth Canal. He and Josh split from the group and used a map to locate what they believed was the entrance to this narrow passage. When they arrived at a small, waist-high hole in the cave wall, John, believing it was the right path, decided to squeeze through. Memories of cave exploring as a child fueled his confidence, but John underestimated the limitations of his adult body. He was now over 6 feet tall and weighed more than 200 pounds. Without hesitation, he went headfirst into the narrow passage. As John pressed deeper into the tunnel, the walls closed in tighter around him. His arms became pinned under his body, and he had to exhale fully to slide past an obstacle, a protruding lip of rock. Unfortunately, this move trapped him. When he tried to inhale, his chest expanded and became wedged against the rock. Worse still, the tunnel ahead of him ended abruptly. It was not the birth canal. He was trapped, nearly upside down, in a dead-end tunnel with no room to turn back. John called out to Josh, who tried to help but also got stuck. Realizing the severity of the situation, Josh managed to free himself and ran to get help. It took 3.5 hours for the first rescue worker, Susie Matola, to reach the scene. Susie tried to comfort John, but the sight of his position in the cave alarmed her. Rescuing him was going to be extremely difficult. John was nearly vertical, with his head lower than his feet, a dangerous position that causes blood to pool in the brain and makes it difficult for the heart to pump blood effectively. Time was running out. Rescue teams worked tirelessly to free John. They used ropes, pulleys, drills, and chisels to try to widen the passage and pull him out. Despite their best efforts, progress was minimal. John had been stuck for hours, and the trauma physician on site estimated he had only 8 to 10 hours to live due to the strain of being inverted. Rescue workers faced another complication. John's legs needed to bend to navigate the tunnel's twists on the way out. This would require breaking his legs, a move likely to send him into fatal shock. After 27 grueling hours, John became unresponsive. He was declared dead in the early hours of November 25, 2009. His body remains inside Nutty Putty Cave, which was permanently sealed with concrete shortly after the tragedy to prevent further accidents. John left behind his wife, Emily, their 1-year-old daughter, and an unborn child. Emily was carrying at the time. Here's the last photo of John during his exploration of Nutty Putty Cave, taken before he entered the fateful tunnel and lost his life. Amelia Schoberg appeared to be just an average teenager, capturing a quick selfie before heading off to spend the evening at a friend's house. What makes this seemingly mundane image unforgettable, however, is the tragic story that follows. It would be the last photo ever taken of her alive. On July 21, 2024, Amelia left her home, anticipating what she thought would be an ordinary night with friends. Her mother, Anna, remembers their earlier argument and how Amelia seemed uneasy about her plans. Later, while on the train, Amelia sent her mother a heartfelt text, apologizing for her behavior and expressing her love. "I'm sorry for being stressed earlier. I love you so much, Mom. You are my life." Those words would be among the last her mother would ever receive. For Amelia, this night wasn't just another sleepover. It was supposed to be her first party. After spending much of her childhood in foster care, she had recently reunited with her mother, and the two had been working on rebuilding their relationship. Anna shared how excited Amelia had been about decorating her room in their new home, planning each detail with care. Sadly, those dreams would never come to fruition. Unbeknownst to Amelia, the event she was heading to was a trap. The two girls who invited her had sinister intentions. Investigators later uncovered evidence showing that the pair had stolen duct tape and knives from local shops as part of their plan. Amelia was lured to an isolated industrial area near the train tracks in Linköping, Sweden. There, a confrontation broke out, possibly over a boy, though the exact cause remains unclear. What followed was horrifying. Amelia was restrained, attacked, and stabbed multiple times. When authorities discovered her body in the early hours of July 23rd, she had injuries to her neck and numerous bruises and cuts. Despite their attempts to save her, it was too late. The brutality of the attack wasn't the only shocking aspect. The two perpetrators recorded their actions, sharing the footage in a group chat and boasting about what they had done. This video is now a critical piece of evidence, though its existence is deeply disturbing. The suspects were swiftly apprehended. A 15-year-old girl was arrested on July 24th, followed by a 13-year-old accomplice the next day. Both admitted their involvement, with one claiming that things spiraled out of control. However, the stolen supplies and planned recording paint a different picture, one of premeditation. Further evidence included Amelia's bag, containing her bank cards and personal belongings, found discarded in water near the crime scene. 2 knives believed to have been used in the attack were also recovered. Amelia was a 14-year-old who simply wanted to trust and connect with her peers, excited about her first party, only to face a heartbreaking betrayal. Anna, her mother, has spoken openly about her grief, sharing how they were starting anew and building a life together. Now, instead of watching her daughter grow and thrive, Anna is left mourning a young life stolen far too soon. At 8:49 a.m. on April 16, 2014, a quiet disaster began to unravel aboard the Sewol ferry en route to Jeju Island, South Korea. The ship, carrying 476 passengers, including 325 high school students, began to list severely to one side. This wasn't an isolated mechanical failure. The ferry had undergone unauthorized renovations to increase passenger capacity, making it dangerously top-heavy. Corrupt regulators, bribed with lavish gifts, had approved its operation without conducting proper inspections. On that fateful morning, the ship had been overloaded with cargo, twice the legal limit, and much of it was improperly secured. As the ferry navigated strong currents, a sharp turn caused it to tilt. The unsecured cargo, including vehicles and containers, shifted abruptly, throwing the ship off balance. In the midst of this chaos, The captain issued an announcement instructing passengers to stay in their cabins. Trusting the captain's reassurances, most obeyed, unaware of the growing danger. For nearly an hour, no further instructions were given, leaving the students trapped in the lower decks, anxious and increasingly aware of their predicament. Calls for help began pouring into authorities, not from the crew, but from the students themselves. Despite their pleas, the response was delayed as the crew hesitated, paralyzed by fear. When the captain finally ordered an evacuation, it was too late. Water had already engulfed much of the ferry, blocking escape routes and trapping passengers. Survivors described scenes of panic as water rushed into hallways, sweeping away those attempting to climb to safety. Divers later recovered the bodies of students with broken fingers. Chilling evidence was found on the students' cell phones, videos and photos capturing their final moments as they waited in vain for instructions. Meanwhile, the captain abandoned ship shortly after issuing the evacuation order, leaving hundreds of passengers behind. In the end, 304 lives were lost, a tragedy made worse by the knowledge that nearly all could have been saved had evacuation begun immediately. The captain, whose gross negligence led to this catastrophe, was sentenced to life in prison. On a quiet December evening in Auckland, New Zealand, a CCTV camera recorded an unremarkable scene. A man in an elevator, calmly pushing a luggage trolley with a large suitcase balanced on top. At first glance, it seemed like any other moment on any other day. But this seemingly mundane image conceals a far darker truth. To understand the significance of that suitcase, we must go back to Grace Mullane, a 22-year-old from England. Recently graduated and eager to explore the world, Grace had meticulously planned her solo adventure. After traveling through South America, she arrived in New Zealand in November 2018. On December 1st, the night before her 22nd birthday, Grace made plans to meet a man she'd connected with on Tinder. His name was Jesse Kempson. She messaged a friend, mentioning how well they seemed to get along, and assuring her that she would check in the next day. That evening, Grace and Jesse met at a bar in Auckland's city center. CCTV footage captured them chatting, laughing, and moving between venues. They left the Bluestone Room around 9:30 p.m., heading to Jesse's hotel. Security footage shows them entering the City Life Hotel together, Jesse fumbling briefly with his keycard before leading Grace to his room, 308. What happened behind those closed doors is known only through the evidence that surfaced later. Sometime that night, Jesse Kempson ended Grace's life. No emergency call was made, no attempt to explain or seek help. Instead, at 1:30 a.m., Kempson searched the internet for terms like hottest fire and Waitakere Ranges, a remote area outside Auckland. He even browsed adult content, all while Grace's lifeless body lay in the room. The next morning, Kempson's focus had shifted entirely. He sent messages to another woman on Tinder, trying to arrange a date for later that day. He then left the hotel, stopping at a nearby store to purchase cleaning supplies and a suitcase. Upon returning, his plan was already in motion. Later, CCTV footage showed him transporting 2 suitcases out of the hotel using a luggage trolley. In one of them was Grace's body, folded to fit inside. Her family, meanwhile, was growing increasingly concerned. December 2nd was Grace's birthday, and she hadn't responded to their messages. By December 5th, with no word from her, they reported her missing. Police began their investigation, initially treating it as a routine disappearance. But as they pieced together CCTV footage and rental car records, a grim story unfolded. On December 9th, they found Grace's body buried in the Waitakere Ranges. She had been wrapped in a blanket and concealed in the suitcase Kempson had purchased. A nearby shovel, believed to be used in digging her grave, was also recovered. Jesse Kempson was arrested on December 8th, the day before Grace's body was found. 2 days later, he was charged with her murder. In court, he appeared composed, even indifferent. His name was initially suppressed under New Zealand law, leaving the public in the dark about his identity. The trial began in November 2019, nearly a year later, and lasted 3 weeks. Kempson pleaded not guilty, claiming Grace's death was an accident during consensual activities. However, the evidence, including his internet searches, the purchase of cleaning supplies, and his casual attempts to move on immediately afterward, told a very different story. In February 2020, Kempson was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 17 years before parole eligibility. But the revelations didn't stop there. When the court lifted his name suppression later that year, the public learned of other crimes he had committed, including assaults on multiple women. One victim, another British tourist, came forward after recognizing him in the news. And so, we return to that haunting image. A man in an elevator, calmly pushing a luggage trolley with a suitcase on top. But now we know the truth. That suitcase held the body of Grace Mullane, a young woman whose bright future was cut short by someone she had trusted. At first glance, the photograph is serene. A woman walking barefoot along a sunlit beach, the ocean stretching endlessly behind her. The caption reads, "The time that is enjoyed is the true time lived." It's an image of carefree joy, the kind of picture you might scroll past on social media without a second thought. But this seemingly idyllic moment hides a chilling reality, a story of neglect, betrayal, and unimaginable loss. The woman in the photo is Crystal Candelario, a mother from Cleveland, Ohio. At home, her 16-month-old daughter, Jalen, was at a stage of life where she depended on constant care and attention. Jalen was just beginning to explore her world, forming words, and needing the nurturing only a caregiver could provide. But Crystal's ability or willingness to fulfill that role was often called into question by those around her. Neighbors later recounted incidents that painted a troubling picture. Once, Crystal left Jalen with the neighbor for what was supposed to be a weekend. That weekend stretched into 6 weeks, with Crystal ignoring calls and refusing to return for her child. In another incident, she reportedly left Jalen home alone for 2 days. Such behavior was not an anomaly, but a pattern. Then came June 2023, when Crystal embarked on a 10-day vacation to Puerto Rico and Detroit. She left Cleveland on June 6th, sharing snapshots of her trip online. Among them was the now infamous photo of her smiling on a beach, a moment she presented as tranquil and carefree. What the world didn't see was the grim reality back home. Crystal had left Jalen completely alone in their house, with no one to check on her, no food, and no water. For 10 days, Jalen was left to fend for herself. Neighbors later reported hearing her cries from inside the house, but the sounds eventually stopped. Some assumed Crystal was home, while others did nothing. By the time anyone realized what had happened, it was far too late. Crystal returned home on the morning of June 16, 2023, to a devastating scene. In the playpen where she had left her daughter, Jalen lay unresponsive. The playpen was soaked with urine and feces, the blankets around her soiled. Before calling emergency services, Crystal changed Jalen into a clean outfit, but it was already too late. Emergency responders pronounced the toddler dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined that Jalen had died of starvation and dehydration. Her body bore no signs of physical trauma, but the toll of neglect was undeniable. In the 10 days she was left alone, Jalen had lost nearly a third of her body weight, weighing 7 pounds less than at her last doctor's visit just 2 months prior. Investigators quickly pieced together the events leading to Jalen's death. Doorbell camera footage revealed Jalen crying in the early days after Crystal left. Crystal, it was determined, had left only a few bottles of milk behind, knowing there was no one to care for her child. In February 2024, Crystal pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and child endangerment as part of a plea deal that spared her the death penalty. Additional charges, including felonious assault and other murder counts, were dropped. During sentencing, her attorney pointed to her history of mental health struggles, claiming she had stopped taking antidepressants earlier that year, which impaired her judgment. Her parents pleaded for leniency, saying they were unaware of the trip and believed Crystal had been caring for Jalen at home, but the court showed no mercy. On March 18, 2024, Judge Brendan Sheehan sentenced Crystal to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In his sentencing, he described her actions as the ultimate act of betrayal, pointing out the unimaginable suffering Jalen endured in her final days. Now, when we look at that serene photo of Crystal on the beach, it's impossible to see it the same way. The image represents the life Crystal wanted to project, carefree and unburdened. But behind that moment of manufactured peace was a tragic reality. A 16-month-old child, abandoned and left to die, terrified and alone. In 2005, Addie Hall and Zach Bowen's paths crossed while they were both bartending in New Orleans. Addie had a fiery personality and a tendency to test the people around her. She would often play the role of a mean girl as her way of flirting, pushing boundaries to see who could handle her volatile nature. Zach, as it turned out, had his own temperamental streak. Their similarities were undeniable, and though their relationship was tempestuous, there was an undeniable connection between them. Friends who observed their constant bickering were skeptical that their relationship would last. But when Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, their bond deepened. As the storm approached, Zach and Addie decided to stay and weather it together. After the hurricane struck, they became local heroes of sorts. They cooked meals for their neighbors and set up a makeshift bar in the French Quarter, giving away drinks to lift spirits in the wake of the disaster. Their resilience and love in the face of chaos earned them a feature in the New York Times, and for a while, they were the celebrated king and queen of the French Quarter. But as life in New Orleans returned to normal, the magic of their bond began to fade. Struggling to make ends meet, the couple's relationship became increasingly strained. The passionate love that had blossomed during the hurricane's aftermath turned into a toxic cycle of vicious arguments. By October 2006, they decided to start fresh in a new apartment, hoping to rekindle their relationship. They found a place above the historic Voodoo spiritual temple on Rampart Street and moved in immediately. However, the move only amplified their issues. Shortly after settling in, Addie discovered that Zach had been unfaithful. Furious, she went to the landlord and demanded that Zach's name be removed from the lease. Zach found out before Addie could confront him directly, igniting a ferocious fight between the two. Days later, Zach showed up at work acting oddly. He wore a hat pulled low over his face and sunglasses, avoiding eye contact and deflecting questions from coworkers. Meanwhile, Addie stopped coming to work entirely. When questioned about her absence, Zach claimed they had fought and that Addie had left New Orleans to return to her hometown in North Carolina. While some found this explanation suspicious, they knew Addie to be unpredictable and didn't press further. On October 17, 2006, police received a call from a New Orleans hotel reporting what appeared to be a body on their parking garage roof. When officers arrived, they found a deceased man who had died from an apparent fall. Searching his pockets, they discovered a note addressed to the police. The note revealed a horrifying confession. The man, Zach Bowen, admitted to murdering his girlfriend, Addie Hall, and directed them to their apartment on Rampart Street. Police rushed to the address, bracing for the worst. Inside, the apartment was ice cold, with the air conditioning set to its lowest temperature. Spray-painted messages covered the walls, including phrases like, "I'm a total failure," and "Look in the oven," with arrows pointing toward the kitchen. Following the morbid instructions, officers opened the oven and discovered Addie's remains. In the apartment, they also found her journal, which Zach had used to write an 8-page confession detailing the murder. He described how he had strangled Addie during an argument and attempted to dismember and cook her body to make disposal easier. However, he ultimately couldn't go through with it, overwhelmed by guilt and horror at his actions. Zach's confession and the grim scene in the apartment revealed the depths of his mental unraveling. After killing Addie, he had spent days in the apartment with her remains, drinking heavily and spray-painting his tormented thoughts on the walls. Finally, unable to live with himself, he chose to end his life by jumping from the hotel. Saturation diving is one of the most extreme and demanding professions in the world, requiring divers to work on underwater structures at extraordinary depths for oil and gas companies. These highly trained specialists descend to depths where the pressure on their bodies is so immense that the gas they breathe becomes trapped inside their tissues. While this is harmless while they're under pressure, the problem arises when they ascend to the surface. As they rise, these trapped gases expand and must be released gradually through a process called decompression stops. If a diver ascends too quickly without allowing time for the gases to escape naturally, they can suffer from decompression sickness, or the bends, which can be fatal. The deeper a diver goes, the longer these decompression stops take. For example, at depths of 2,000 feet, it can take about 33 hours to safely return to the surface. Because this process is so time-consuming, oil and gas companies developed a solution: pressurized living chambers aboard ships and oil rigs where divers remain at pressure for the entirety of their multi-week shifts. This ensures that the gases in their bodies remain stable, eliminating the need for decompression after each dive. Divers live in these cramped chambers for weeks, traveling to and from the seafloor in a small, pressurized dive bell that connects to the chamber without depressurizing the entire system. At the end of their shifts, they undergo one long decompression period inside the chamber before being able to return to normal atmospheric pressure. In September 2012, a saturation diver named Chris Lemons experienced a life-threatening incident while working in the North Sea. At 32 years old, Chris, along with 11 other divers, had embarked on a 4-week saturation shift. On September 12th, Chris, along with 2 other divers, Dave and Duncan, was assigned routine maintenance on an oil platform located 330 feet below the surface. Despite the North Sea's notoriously harsh weather, they decided to proceed with the dive, even though conditions were especially rough that day. The process began with the divers putting on their specialized equipment and entering the dive bell through a tunnel from their pressurized chamber. The dive bell was then lowered into the ocean, guided by a dynamic positioning system, a high-tech navigation system that keeps the ship steady above the dive site, regardless of waves or wind. This system is crucial because the dive bell and the divers connected to it rely on the ship staying in place. Once the bell reached the target depth, Chris opened a hatch on the bottom, allowing access to the water while maintaining the internal pressure. Duncan stayed inside the bell to assist Chris and Dave, who exited to work on the oil platform. The divers were connected to the bell by umbilicals, long cables providing air, heat, electricity, and communication. These umbilicals are vital lifelines, ensuring the divers' survival and connection to the surface. After descending to the seafloor, the divers climbed the oil platform to their assigned work areas. About an hour into their task, disaster struck. The dynamic positioning system on the ship failed, and the backup system also malfunctioned. This caused the ship to drift in the rough seas, dragging the dive bell and the divers along with it. Recognizing the severity of the situation, the surface crew ordered Chris and Dave to immediately abandon their tasks and return to the bell. Both divers began climbing back to the bell, but their umbilicals were stretched taut as the ship drifted farther away. Dave managed to reach the bell, but Chris's umbilical became entangled around a pylon on the oil platform. Unable to free himself, Chris radioed Duncan for more slack, only to be told there was none left. As tension on his umbilical increased, it eventually snapped with a loud explosion, cutting off Chris's air supply, heat, communication, and light. He was thrown backward and plunged into the freezing, pitch-black water. Now relying on his emergency air canisters, which provided only 5 to 6 minutes of breathing time, Chris faced an almost certain death. Alone in the dark and with limited time, he began walking in a random direction, hoping to find the oil platform again. Miraculously, he stumbled upon it and climbed to the top, where he waited in vain for rescue. By this time, his air supply would have been completely exhausted, leaving him unconscious and presumed dead. Meanwhile, the ship's crew frantically tried to reposition the vessel above the dive site. A remote-controlled underwater vehicle was deployed to locate Chris. After several tense minutes, the vehicle's camera located him lying motionless atop the platform. By then, Chris had been without air for over 20 minutes, far beyond what anyone could survive. What happened next would defy all expectations. Duncan and Dave, who were still in the dive bell, received word from the surface team that Chris's body had been located. Though they believed he was almost certainly dead, they were ordered to retrieve him. With the ship finally repositioned, the dive bell was lowered back toward the oil platform. Dave suited up and exited the bell, navigating the wreckage of Chris's snapped umbilical and the surrounding debris. When he reached Chris's lifeless body, Dave carried him back to the bell. Inside, Duncan and Dave placed Chris on the floor, expecting to recover only his remains. His face was pale, and there were no signs of breathing or a pulse. As they prepared to begin CPR, a remarkable thing happened. Chris suddenly gasped for air and began coughing. He had survived over 30 minutes in freezing water with no oxygen, defying every expectation and the limits of human endurance. Chris's miraculous survival was later attributed to a combination of factors. The cold water of the North Sea had likely induced a hypothermic state, which slowed his metabolism and reduced his oxygen demand. This physiological reaction, coupled with an extraordinary amount of luck and his mental fortitude, enabled him to cling to life long enough for rescue. After being stabilized in the dive bell, Chris was returned to the ship's pressurized chamber, where he underwent the mandatory decompression process. Though he recovered fully and returned to diving shortly after the incident, the experience left him deeply reflective about the risks of his profession. This is a story about Miriam Rodriguez and her daughter Karen. It begins with a simple photo. Miriam and Karen sitting close together, staring at the camera. It was 4 a.m. on January 24, 2014, when Miriam Rodriguez's phone rang. Her eldest daughter, Azalea, was on the other end. The news she delivered would change their family forever. Just the day before, Karen, Miriam's 20-year-old daughter, was driving through San Fernando, Mexico, on her way to help at their family business, a cowboy boot shop called Rodeo Boots. But Karen never made it to the shop. 2 vehicles had surrounded Karen's car. Armed men forced her out of the driver's seat and into their vehicle. Karen was taken to the Rodriguez family home, where the kidnappers tied her up and prepared to demand a ransom. This was not unusual in San Fernando, a region plagued by cartel violence. The Zetas cartel controlled the area, and kidnappings were a lucrative business for them. While Karen was being held captive, a family friend visited the Rodriguez home to work on a car parked outside. The kidnappers, startled by this unexpected interruption, panicked. They fled, taking both Karen and the friend with them. The Rodriguez family was left to scramble for answers. The kidnappers soon contacted the family, demanding a ransom. Miriam and her husband borrowed money from the bank to meet their demands. In San Fernando, it was so common that banks even offered specific loans for ransom situations. The money was dropped at the agreed location, but Karen never came home. Weeks turned into months without any word. Desperate for answers, Miriam managed to arrange a meeting with a man connected to the Zetas cartel. They met at a small restaurant. Miriam begged him to help bring Karen back. He claimed the cartel didn't have Karen, but offered to find out more for $2,000. Miriam agreed, but the money led nowhere. The calls from the kidnappers stopped altogether. Months later, they contacted the family one final time, demanding an additional $500. Miriam paid it, but once again, there was silence. Miriam knew in her heart what this meant. One day, Miriam turned to Azalea and said what no mother should ever have to admit: Karen wasn't coming back. But she also made a promise that would shape the rest of her life. She vowed to find the people who had taken her daughter. Miriam's search began with an unlikely lead: the name of the cartel member she had met months earlier. His name was enough for her to begin her investigation. She found him on Facebook and discovered he had connections to a young woman who worked at a local ice cream shop. Miriam parked outside the shop, watching until she saw him. She followed him home, uncovering his location. But Miriam wasn't ready to act yet. She needed more information. Disguising herself by dyeing her hair red and donning a government uniform, Miriam posed as a survey worker. She went door to door in his neighborhood, asking casual questions and gathering details about him and his associates. Once she had enough evidence, she went to the authorities. With a federal officer's help, they attempted to arrest the man. He escaped during the first raid, but Miriam persisted. Eventually, he was caught. His arrest led to more names and more leads. One of those names was an 18-year-old named Zapata Gonzalez. Despite his youth, he knew critical details about Karen's kidnapping. He revealed the location of a ranch where Karen had been held. When authorities searched the ranch, they uncovered some of Karen's belongings: a scarf, a cushion from her truck, and eventually, part of her remains. The ranch was a grim discovery, littered with the bodies of other victims. For Miriam, it was devastating confirmation of the brutality she was up against. Miriam's search continued. She remembered a strange encounter at a restaurant near the ranch with a woman named Elvia Ulabet Encore, someone Miriam had known for years. At the time, Elvia's behavior seemed odd, but Miriam hadn't thought much of it. Now, with the ranch and Karen's death weighing heavily on her mind, Miriam suspected Elvia knew more than she had let on. Miriam began investigating Elvia. She discovered that Elvia had been in a relationship with one of Karen's kidnappers. Further digging revealed that the ransom calls to the Rodriguez family had been made from Elvia's home. Armed with this evidence, Miriam took the information to the police. She waited outside the prison during visiting hours, watching until Elvia appeared. The police arrested her on the spot. The investigation confirmed that Elvia's home had been used as a base for the kidnapping operation. Miriam didn't stop there. Her search led her to others connected to the crime. One suspect, Enrique Flores, had started attending church regularly and seemed to have turned his life around. Miriam attended services, quietly watching until she was sure it was him. She passed the information to the police, who arrested him during a Sunday service. Another lead brought her to a man who had taken on a new identity as a street vendor selling flowers at the Texas border. When Miriam confronted him, he tried to run. She chased him across a crowded bridge, cornering him and holding him at gunpoint until the police arrived. By the end of her search, Miriam had helped bring 10 people connected to Karen's kidnapping to justice. But her fight didn't end with her daughter's case. Miriam founded a support group for families of the disappeared, known as the Vanished Collective of San Fernando. The group grew rapidly, with over 600 families joining the effort to find their loved ones. Miriam's determination inspired many, but it also made her a target. In early 2017, 29 inmates, including some of Karen's abductors, escaped from a penitentiary. Fearing for her safety, Miriam requested police protection, but the promise of patrols around her home went unfulfilled. On May 10, 2017, Mother's Day in Mexico, Miriam returned home on crutches, having recently broken her foot while chasing yet another suspect. As she approached her house, a white Nissan pulled up. Inside were some of the escaped inmates. They shot Miriam 12 times. Her husband found her moments later, her hand in her purse, where she always kept her pistol. Miriam Rodriguez was 57 years old. After her death, 2 of her killers were arrested, and another was killed in a shootout. Her son attempted to keep the collective she had founded alive, but without Miriam's relentless drive, it gradually dissolved. Miriam's work brought justice for her daughter and inspired countless others to fight for their loved ones. She was not a detective, a police officer, or a person in power. She was a mother who refused to let her daughter's story end in silence. At first glance, it seems like a sweet and innocent moment between a child and her baby brother. But something feels off, something unsettling that you can't quite put into words. What could possibly be wrong with such a seemingly tender scene? This is the story of Lina Medina, a little girl from a remote village in Peru, whose life took an unimaginable turn. Born into a humble family, Lina spent her early years playing with other children, laughing, and exploring her tiny world with the kind of boundless curiosity only a child can have. But as her 5th birthday approached, something about Lina began to change. Her parents noticed her belly was swelling, growing in a way that was inexplicable for a girl so young. At first, they dismissed it as a strange growth spurt or perhaps a sign of malnutrition. But as the weeks passed, her belly continued to expand and her parents grew increasingly alarmed. Lena no longer had the energy of a typical young girl. She seemed tired, fragile, and unwell. Her body was undergoing changes that defied explanation. Desperate for answers, her family sought medical help. When they reached a hospital in Pisco, the doctors were baffled. Lena was just a child, yet her symptoms pointed to something no one wanted to believe. At first, they suspected a tumor, a rare and potentially life-threatening growth. They ran tests, hoping to identify the issue and provide treatment. But the results shocked everyone. Lena wasn't sick. She was 7 months pregnant. A 5-year-old girl carrying a child? It was unprecedented, unthinkable. Lena's condition challenged everything the doctors thought they knew about human biology. As they delved deeper, they discovered that Lena had a rare condition called precocious puberty, which causes the body to begin developing into adulthood at an unusually young age. Lena had started menstruating at just 3 years old, which made it biologically possible for her to conceive, even at such a tender age. News of Lena's pregnancy spread rapidly. People across Peru, and soon the world, were captivated by the shocking and deeply unsettling case. Doctors, journalists, and curious onlookers descended on the village, eager to learn more. But for Lena and her family, the attention was a nightmare. They wanted nothing more than to protect their little girl. The doctors knew Lena's pregnancy posed a grave risk to her health. Her small body was not equipped to handle the strain of childbirth. After much deliberation, they decided the safest course of action was a cesarean section. And so on May 14, 1939, Lena Medina, at just 5 years old, gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He weighed 6 pounds and was named Gerardo, after the doctor who first diagnosed Lena's pregnancy. Though the delivery was successful, the challenges were far from over. To shield Lena and Gerardo from the prying eyes of the world, her family made a difficult decision. They raised Gerardo to believe Lena was his sister, not his mother. For years, this fiction protected them both, but the truth eventually came out, raising questions that had no easy answers. The media frenzy surrounding Lena's story persisted. She was dubbed the youngest mother in history, a title that brought with it a mix of pity, curiosity, and disbelief. Despite the efforts of Lena's family and the Peruvian government to shield her from becoming a spectacle, the weight of her story was impossible to escape. Gerardo grew up healthy and strong, living as normal a life as possible under such extraordinary circumstances. However, he passed away in 1979 at the age of 40 from bone marrow disease. Lena, on the other hand, chose a life of privacy, steering clear of the spotlight. She eventually married and had another son, determined to protect him from the attention that had once engulfed her. But even as Lena moved on, the world continued to grapple with the unanswered questions her story left behind. The most haunting of these was the identity of Gerardo's father. Lena never revealed who it was, perhaps because she didn't know or couldn't understand. She was just a child, too young to comprehend the events that had unfolded. Rumors swirled, some suggesting it was a family member, others speculating it was a stranger who had taken advantage of her. But with no evidence and no thorough investigation, the truth remains a mystery. On the night of February 9, 2004, a resident of Woodsville, New Hampshire, noticed a compact black car stuck in a snowbank near the road by her home. Concerned, she contacted the local sheriff's office to report the situation, prompting officers to be dispatched to the scene. Not long after, a school bus driver traveling along the same route spotted the stranded car and stopped to check on the driver. The young woman introduced herself as Maura Murray, a 21-year-old college student from Massachusetts. She appeared unhurt and reassured him that a tow truck was already on its way. Satisfied with her explanation, the bus driver left, though he felt uneasy about the interaction. Shortly after, he decided to inform the authorities, only to learn they were already en route. When an officer arrived, the black car was still there, but Maura was nowhere to be found. A brief search of the area turned up no clues about her whereabouts or any signs of foul play. Her family was contacted, but none of them had heard from her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Just a day prior, Maura had spent time with her father and exhibited no unusual behavior. On the morning of her disappearance, classes at her college were canceled due to a snowstorm. She emailed her professors and employer, stating that a family member had died and requesting a week off, though her relatives later clarified this wasn't true. After sending the emails, she withdrew $280 from an ATM, purchased alcohol from a liquor store, and visited the DMV to address an issue with previous damage to her car. Beyond these actions, what transpired before the crash remains a mystery. A search of her abandoned car revealed directions to a condominium complex in Burlington, Vermont. Phone records showed she had spoken with the property owner, but hadn't mentioned plans to anyone about traveling to Vermont. Back in her dorm, her belongings were found packed neatly, as if she had intended to leave. A note addressed to her boyfriend reflecting on their relationship troubles was also discovered, but wasn't explicitly a farewell letter. While most of her possessions were accounted for, her phone and bank cards were missing. Neither was ever used again after her disappearance. 6 days later, a massive search effort covered 20 square miles around the crash site using helicopters, scent dogs, and volunteers. Despite these efforts, no trace of Maura was found. Strangely, although snow covered the ground, there were no footprints near the car, and the dogs lost her scent a short distance away, as if she had vanished. The minutes between the bus driver leaving and the officer's arrival remain critical. In that narrow window, Maura disappeared without explanation. To this day, her fate remains a mystery, and her case unsolved. One of the final confirmed images of Maura shows her withdrawing money from an ATM just hours before driving to Woodsville, where her car was found abandoned and she disappeared. In the early 2000s, Armin Maiwis seemed like an upstanding citizen in his German community. He mowed neighbors' lawns, offered to fix friends' cars, and hosted elaborate dinner parties. However, beneath this seemingly wholesome persona lurked a deeply disturbed individual. In 2001, Maiwis posted an online ad seeking a young, physically fit man willing to be slaughtered and consumed. The bizarre request drew considerable attention, with many responding out of curiosity. Yet none followed through, until Bernd Jürgen Brandes, who had previously placed his own ad asking to be killed and eaten, came across Maiwis' post. The two connected, agreeing to fulfill each other's macabre desires. On March 9, 2001, Brandes traveled to Maiwis' home. The encounter was meticulously documented by Maiwis, who set up a video camera to capture Brandes' consent. As planned, Brandes lay in a bathtub, giving Maiwis the green light. Maiwis initially attempted to bite into him, but found it impossible. At Brandes' suggestion, Maiwis used a knife to remove a portion of his flesh. The pair tried cooking and eating it together, but they burned the meat, ultimately feeding it to Maiwis' dog. As Brandes began slipping in and out of consciousness due to significant blood loss, Maiwis paused to read a Star Trek book in another room. Returning later to find Brandes barely alive, Maiwis deliberated and prayed before finally ending his life. He then butchered Brandes' body, storing the meat in his freezer. Over the next 10 months, Maiwis consumed approximately 44 pounds of Brandes' remains. In December 2001, Maiwis posted another ad seeking a willing participant, which ultimately led to his arrest. Police, acting on a tip, discovered Brandes' remains behind pizza boxes in Maiwis' freezer. Despite presenting the video evidence of Brandes' clear consent, Maiwis was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. This haunting case became infamous for its gruesome details, including the online photo Maiwis used to attract Brandes and the bathtub where the unthinkable act occurred. In 1999, Hisashi Uchi's life seemed ordinary and full. He was married, a proud father of a young son, and worked as a technician at the JCO Tokaimura power plant in Japan. JCO, the company operating the power plant, had for years been skirting official safety regulations to boost productivity. They had developed an unofficial protocol known as the Shadow Guide, which outlined shortcuts for handling radioactive materials. These shortcuts were perilous and blatantly violated nuclear safety standards. On September 30th, 1999, Uchi and his colleagues were tasked with preparing fuel for the Joyo fast reactor. Using the Shadow Guide's methods, they bypassed safety procedures and employed equipment not designed to handle the quantities of radioactive material they were working with. Uchi's role was to hold a funnel over a large steel containment tank while a colleague poured a uranium solution into it. The tank, inadequate for such a purpose, was a ticking time bomb. As Uchi leaned over the tank, a catastrophic event known as criticality occurred. A loud bang echoed through the room, and a vivid blue light engulfed the space. The light was Cherenkov radiation, an ominous signal of an uncontrolled nuclear reaction. Uchi, closest to the tank, absorbed the brunt of the radiation, an astounding 17 sieverts. To put it in perspective, just 8 sieverts is considered a lethal dose. When rescuers arrived, they found Uchi vomiting uncontrollably, dizzy, and disoriented. Despite these symptoms, he bore no visible wounds or burns. He was immediately airlifted to a hospital, where doctors initially marveled at his apparent resilience. Aside from slight redness on his right arm, which had been closest to the tank, his condition seemed stable. He was even able to joke with staff about returning home soon. But Uchi was already a dead man walking, trapped in what is known as the walking ghost phase. The intense radiation had obliterated his chromosomes, the essential blueprint for cellular reproduction. While his body appeared functional, it was irreversibly dying from the inside out. His cells, unable to regenerate, were essentially ticking down to the end of their lifespan. Within weeks, Uchi's condition deteriorated drastically. His intestines began hemorrhaging, and his skin started sloughing off. Skin grafts failed to adhere to his body, forcing medical staff to wrap him in gauze like a mummy to contain his bodily fluids. By November, nearly 2 months after the accident, his pain became so unbearable that he was placed in a medically induced coma. Even in his comatose state, Uchi's body resisted death. His heart stopped 3 times, and each time, the medical team revived him, driven by the hope of learning more about radiation exposure to prevent future tragedies. However, these efforts came at an immense cost. When Uchi briefly regained consciousness, he begged the doctors to let him die, declaring, "I am not a guinea pig." Eventually, a do not resuscitate order was put in place, granting him a measure of peace in his final days. After 83 harrowing days of unimaginable suffering, Hisashi Uchi passed away. The image most associated with Uchi's story is deeply unsettling, showing him in the walking ghost phase, blissfully unaware of the fate awaiting him. While the more graphic photographs of his later condition are rarely shared, scattered across the North American continent are many ghost towns, places that once thrived with life and are now abandoned, left to decay. These towns often feature dilapidated churches, schools, and buildings. The reasons for their demise vary: new railroads or highways bypassing the area, depletion of natural resources, wars, natural disasters, or political upheaval. But one ghost town in North America stands out due to its uniquely dark and mysterious history. That town is Portlock, Alaska. Portlock, also known as Port Chatham, lies on the southwestern tip of the Kenai Peninsula, an area celebrated for its breathtaking beauty, but also known for its extreme remoteness. Accessible only by boat or bush plane, this isolated settlement was technically founded in 1787 by Captain Nathaniel Portlock of the Royal Navy. However, it wasn't until the early 1900s, when commercial fishermen established a cannery there, that it became a thriving town. By 1921, Portlock's fishing industry was booming. The U.S. government recognized its potential and even established a post office, predicting it would become a major commercial fishing hub. But everything changed in the 1930s. Reports began to spread across the Kenai Peninsula of something ominous happening in Portlock. Men from the town were disappearing at an alarming rate, and those who were found were often dead and mutilated, their bodies discovered in a nearby lagoon. At first, these deaths were attributed to bear attacks, but the native people of the Kenai Peninsula, upon hearing of the events, had a chilling explanation. They warned the townsfolk of the Nantina, a creature described as half man, half beast. Standing tall and covered in hair, the Nantina was said to inhabit the dense forests near the town. What started as folklore took on a more sinister tone as the disappearances and deaths continued. From 1930 to 1950, dozens of residents vanished into the surrounding wilderness or were found dead in gruesome conditions. One particularly harrowing incident occurred in 1943. A resident named John Meyer was attacked at his campsite. Something leapt onto his back, pummeling him relentlessly. His dog's barking eventually scared the assailant off, allowing John to stagger back into town. Before succumbing to his injuries, he described his attacker as a large, hairy, man-like figure. In another case, a group of hunters discovered massive 18-inch tracks in the forest. Following the tracks, they came upon a blood-soaked clearing that bore evidence of a ferocious struggle. Pieces of what appeared to be a bear or moose were strewn about. The tracks led up a nearby mountain, but the hunters dared not follow. Even the Alaskan newspapers began speculating about the town's grim fate, acknowledging that something beyond human understanding was at play. By 1949, after nearly 2 decades of disappearances and unexplained deaths, the people of Portlock decided they had endured enough. Practically overnight, the entire town evacuated, leaving their belongings behind. The postmaster was the last to leave, staying only long enough to officially close the post office. He later described his final days in the abandoned town as terrifying, filled with eerie noises and sightings of strange figures in the trees. Since then, Portlock has remained abandoned. Occasionally, fishermen or adventurers have stumbled upon the ghost town, but their experiences have often been unsettling. In the 1970s, a group of fishermen sought refuge there during a storm. After setting up camp, they witnessed something massive moving through the forest. Terrified, they packed up and left, preferring to face the storm rather than whatever lurked in the woods. Few modern photographs or videos exist of the site, but one eerie image captures a lone building standing amidst the ruins. This structure sits close to the forest where many disappeared and near the lagoon where the mutilated bodies were found. While skeptics might dismiss the Nantina as folklore, the undeniable fact remains: something was responsible for the deaths and disappearances in Portlock. Mike Moylan, a 45-year-old man from Florida, jolted awake with an excruciating headache. Gripping his head in pain, he squinted at the alarm clock across the room. 4:30 a.m., June 28, 2007. Dizzy, he tried to stand but had to sit back down before steadying himself. After taking a few deep breaths, he got up again, crossed his bedroom to the bathroom, and downed 3 painkillers from the medicine cabinet. Returning to bed, Mike noticed a dark spot on his pillow. Not wanting to wake his sleeping wife, April, he didn't turn on the lights. Running his hands over his head, he found blood near his right ear. He assumed April must have accidentally elbowed him in her sleep, causing the bleeding and the headache. Content with this explanation, he lay back down, waiting for the painkillers to take effect. Half an hour later, the pain had only intensified and his ear was still bleeding. Alarmed, Mike considered the possibility of a ruptured aneurysm. Panicking, he woke April, urging her to drive him to the hospital immediately. Though groggy and confused, she eventually agreed. At the emergency room, doctors x-rayed Mike's head. When a nurse returned with the x-ray, she held it up to the light, pointing to an object in his skull. "It looks like you've been shot," she said. Stunned, Mike and April struggled to comprehend. Mike was rushed into surgery, where doctors successfully removed the bullet from his head. As Mike recovered in his hospital bed, police arrived to investigate. Initially, they suspected a stray bullet had entered the house and struck him. However, during questioning, April revealed she kept a pistol under her pillow, which she claimed might have fired accidentally. As police pressed her further, her story unraveled, and she confessed to attempting to kill Mike. She admitted her motive. She had recently ruined one of their successful businesses and feared Mike discovering the truth. Mike, devastated by her betrayal, recalled noticing strange behavior from April that morning. She had taken an unusually long time to get dressed after he woke her, and had driven to the hospital at a suspiciously slow pace, seemingly stalling in hopes he wouldn't make it. April was charged with attempted murder, but served only a year in prison after accepting a plea deal. In 1992, Marvin Heemeyer, a 41-year-old repairman, purchased a plot of land in the small town of Granby, Colorado. He set up a muffler shop on the property and successfully ran his business there for about a decade. In the early 2000s, a cement company approached him with an offer to purchase a portion of his land for building a cement plant. Initially, Marvin was reluctant, but the company offered a substantial amount of money, and after lengthy negotiations, Marvin was ready to sell. However, just before the deal could be finalized, Granby's zoning commission informed the cement company that they didn't need Marvin's land to proceed with construction. They could build the plant adjacent to his property instead. The cement company quickly abandoned the deal, thrilled to avoid the purchase. Marvin, on the other hand, was enraged. Not only had he lost a potentially lucrative deal, but the construction of the plant next to his property also posed major disruptions. The neighboring land, which Marvin had used as a shortcut between his home and muffler shop, was now inaccessible. Marvin began petitioning the town to halt the construction, but every appeal was rejected. Within a year, the cement plant was built and operational, directly beside Marvin's property. The situation left Marvin feeling betrayed and embittered. Over the next few years, his frustrations grew as he clashed with town officials over zoning decisions, and he became convinced that the system was stacked against him. On the afternoon of June 4, 2004, the residents of Granby were startled by a thunderous noise reverberating through the town. When they rushed outside, they were met with a shocking sight: a massive, fully armored bulldozer rumbling down the streets. The vehicle was encased in steel plates over a foot thick in some areas, leaving no visible windows or openings. Inside, the driver had welded himself in and installed cameras on the exterior to navigate. The heavily modified bulldozer, later dubbed the Killdozer, was traveling at a slow but relentless pace of about 4 miles per hour, crushing everything in its path. Marvin Heemeyer was at the controls, seeking revenge against those he believed had wronged him. Over the course of 2 hours, he used the Killdozer to destroy 13 buildings, beginning with the cement plant that had fueled his grudge. He then targeted the town hall, a local bank, the police station, the local newspaper's office, a hardware store, and even the home of Granby's former mayor. Terrified residents fled for safety and frantically called 911. Police scrambled to stop the armored machine, but were helpless against its sheer power and impenetrable exterior. Even their largest vehicles were effortlessly pushed aside, and SWAT teams' high-caliber, armor-piercing rounds proved useless. The rampage only ended when the bulldozer became trapped in the basement of a building, its treads unable to gain traction. Moments later, the engine gave out, leaving the machine immobilized. It took authorities 7 hours to cut through the thick armor and access the inside of the bulldozer. There, they found Marvin, who had taken his own life. It was later revealed that Marvin had spent over a year and a half meticulously modifying the bulldozer into an unstoppable assault vehicle. He had planned the rampage as an act of vengeance against the town officials and institutions he held responsible for his grievances. Marvin was the sole fatality in the event, but his actions caused over $7 million in damages.